Ashley. Hey, Sydney. Hi.
Oh, hi, how are you?
Good. It's nice to officially e-meet you. I'm
Hi.
looking left here because I'm just like pulling up our questions. Um, yeah, please take a moment to introduce yourself, anything about you, and anything you want to make sure that we know when and like how to listen. I'm going to turn off these comments, but like I said, everybody, please, please, please drop questions in the box.
Cool. Well, hello, everyone. Hello, Jojo. Again, thank you so much for the invite. My name is Sydney Balou, aka Sid Extravaganza. I am a writer, a producer, a storyteller, an archivist, and a
Mm,
dancer.
mm,
I do oral histories of the ballroom community. I
mm.
as a co-executive producer on competition reality show on HBO Max called Legendary, which is about the ballroom scene. And in addition to all of that, I write about ballroom for the New York Times, also Vice. And and I'm currently writing a book about the history and evolution of the ballroom scene in New York City.
Mm.
And for those who don't know ballroom culture, it's so many things. It's everything. Uh, it's an LGBTQ plus community and allies and friends that is rooted in the Black and Latinx LGBTQ community in New York City.
Mm,
Um, has roots that go back 100 years and beyond, and
mm,
um, is rooted in kind of like drag culture, fashion, performance,
mm.
everything.
Yeah.
Uh, the idea is that you have balls or competitions where there's several different categories. People compete for cash prizes and trophies and status. And yeah, it's been
Mm,
going for quite some time. And we're here in 2020 with the continuation of that. And
yeah.
as a member of the House of Extravaganza, I also walk and compete in balls.
Mm.
I have walked realness, and I also, but my main focus is old way performance, which is the original way.
Yes. I love Old Way. Yes.
Lines and shapes and grace and precision. And last year, I made history as the first transgender guy to win a voguing category
That's amazing. That's amazing.
at the latex ball. So it's, yeah, I have quite a bit of knowledge. I've been in the scene for 8 years, and I'm happy, Jojo, to be here. Uh, oh, say my pronouns are he, him, his. And yes, I'm currently actually on Lenny Lenape land here in what is New York City or Brooklyn. And sadly, that noise is the Long Island Rail. I hope it doesn't get in the way. But
I
yeah,
was like, wait, just what happened? I don't know. I was like, did you see me checking my bus? I was like,
no,
what's
no,
going on?
yeah, it's just the apartment I'm in. So hopefully it
No,
doesn't get.
no, that's cool. That's cool. I appreciate it because I was like calculating what's going on. So yeah, thank you so much for your introduction and thank you for your work and like yeah, I think it's like I'm presenced in this whole interview process, just how like yeah, when we're fighting for justice, social justice, like it's not really it's not something that's necessarily celebrated, right? Because if you're talking to the people who want to hear what you have to say, you're not really making change. So a lot of it is bumping up against people who don't agree, who don't want to hear it. And I think having these conversations become more normalized is imperative. So I just want to like make sure that you feel acknowledged and celebrated because I think like it's just not happening enough. So thank you for your work and all that you've done on yourself to heal and be able to be empowered to be able to like have the courage to speak today and share and educate us. So thank you for that. And yeah, so if you would like, I would love to have you start us off. Kat kind of started us off in the same regard, just talking a little bit about like some facts, some statistics, some just like data information about like where we are in terms of just how like trans men and women are disproportionately abused and attacked. Just anything to kind of like presence for people because, I think so many of us just don't know. So if you would be as kind to share that so we can have a good opening listening.
Yeah, and just, I mean, there's so much to discuss. It's so interesting because I think, especially in this time of COVID and all the protests that have been going on, there's just been so obviously much discussion, especially about the importance not only of Black lives in general, but Black trans lives. I think
Mm-hmm.
the LGBTQ community plus IA plus community is concerned, like, you know, the focus is definitely on the fact that unfortunately, and I looked up the statistic today, the number of transgender people who have been killed this year is at 30, which is actually higher than last year in 2019, which was at 27. So, and these
Mm.
are only reported killings, and the overwhelming
Right.
number of those people are Black and Latinx, and particularly Black and Latinx transgender women,
Mm.
which is extremely important to discuss and highlight of the like national pandemic and really international pandemic that trans women of color are targeted and murdered at ridiculously high rates. And it should also be noted just the specific ways also, I think, trans men, Black masculine people, how our bodies are also read in this world, in this system of like white supremacy that we live in.
Yeah.
That, you know, Tony McDade, who was killed this year by Tallahassee police. I mean, you know, the cop isn't going to look and think, oh, are you trans or not, before, you know, pulling a trigger if they see you as a threat. And sadly, that is also, I think, something that is like, of course, like in the back of our minds, and is something that we're constantly trying to push for, because it's like, it's not only I think within the LGBTQ plus community that we're trying to get more sort of visibility for our rights, for our issues, but then also even in like Black Lives Matter at large. I mean, how often do you hear people talk about Tony McDade? Not as
Yeah.
many for other issues. And you know, and that's it's also, I think, for me as a member of the ballroom scene, you know, it's interesting because, like, I think with ballroom, we're also constantly in conversation. It's about celebration, it's about joy, especially reclaiming all of that and having all of that in the midst of, you know, just constantly dealing with these issues of the ways that obviously the world just systemically oppresses LGBTQ plus
Right.
color.
Yeah.
Uh, and in a way, yes, that's always kind of been part of the history because, you know, yes, ballroom goes back definitely decades. Most people see I would say, like the starting point really in the 1970s
Mm-hmm.
when it kind of emerges after the creation of the House of LaBeija in 1972. And even then, right in the 80s, we were dealing with the AIDS epidemic, with AIDS and HIV, and the way that that virus specifically affected our communities.
Mm-hmm.
What I find so interesting is, and I wrote about this in a piece that I wrote this past summer for the New York Times about how folks in the ballroom scene have been both reacting to COVID, as in like finding methods of reclaiming joy in these times of scarcity and
Yeah.
especially inflation, and then also joining in the protest, and how it's not really new for us. You know, it's not like,
Right. Yeah.
like,
Like, welcome to the fight.
yeah, I mean, we can't compare this virus necessarily in the same ways to HIV and AIDS, but there are many parallels. You know, there are many ways we see which communities are most affected. We see how, you know, this is being discussed. And I know for a lot of elders in our community, there are just so many like PTSD memories of what it was like when, yeah, you hear about friends or people who you thought would be there tomorrow who aren't. And also just, you know, this current government, which does not care about any of our lives. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Sort of the you know, the lack of care and the lack of political will to really do something. I mean, what's different this time is the fact that everybody, you know, and everybody was affected, obviously, by HIV and AIDS. It's something that does not discriminate, but
Sure.
the way in which it was discussed, obviously, was in a very discriminatory way,
Yeah.
specific to our communities.
Right.
Whereas now, you know, that language and the way that's discussed has definitely, you know, people are realizing, like, yes, it affects everybody, literally the president. You are not
Yeah.
in. So in any case, there's just a lot to sort of say and hold space for there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I think like that's really important. Um, and for example, right now, like we're very much inside of the, civil rights movement again. And we're really lifting up Black Lives Matter. And, I think it's just important for us to just remember that it really is like all Black Lives Matter, and there has to be inclusion inside of all of it. And I mean, I just like full transparency, it was not until like this past year that I was able to recognize my own transphobia, my own like biases and things like that. So just, I had so many stigmatisms around things, and I wouldn't say like, I think it's important to look at the word phobia because, I would never have said like, oh, I had transphobia, because I would think of the word phobia as fear. And I'm like, well, I'm not scared of trans people, right? So maybe you can just talk about this word transphobia, what it means, and like how to move through it, because I just, I grew up Catholic, so I just had a lot of like stuff around that, and like what was right and what was broken and what was healing and all of those kinds of things. So can you maybe speak to transphobia, debunking what like the phobia aspect of it, and just kind of
Yeah.
breaking that down for us? Yeah.
And it's interesting you raise that point, because I think it even took me a while to really understand, I think in the earlier parts of my transition, about like how people were perceiving me and reading me. Because before I identified as trans, I identified as a queer lesbian woman. That also comes with its own level of baggage of
Hmm.
lesbophobia, of, just general, misogyny in a very particular way. And
Yeah.
think because I was assigned female at birth, and like just growing up in a certain way, you learn how to manage things. I almost feel like it's like, okay, we know, you can almost like sniff it out at a certain point. You're like, okay, like that interaction was weird. And then I think you get to a certain point in your life, you're like, oh, that was sexism, actually. Like, and
Right,
then
right, right.
you're getting really quick where you're like, no, I'm not going to deal with that. Or like you pick and choose your battles, and you're like, okay,
Exactly. Yeah.
address this. No, I just want to go home and watch Netflix. Like I don't. And
Yeah,
I
you're
think
like, you don't get my emotional labor. Yeah.
yeah, right. You're not today, Satan. I feel like I've had we're not going to do this. So and then but I think what took me a while, even for myself, was to recognize transphobia, just the
Yeah.
way that I was being read and the way people were talking to me. Because
Mm,
I think like, yes, the phobia is, people, because I think also when we think of phobias, it's always like extreme, whether it's arachnophobia or, whatever, claustrophobia. But like, really, obviously, the way trans people live our lives is our business and not yours. Anybody's, really. I mean, that goes
yeah.
for. And I think, yeah, it's, a lot of that fear, I think when you really boil it down, when we have these discussions about what is toxic masculinity,
Right.
um, some of that toxicity is the idea that you have to know everything. And
Hmm.
it's like, if you think about it, right, mansplaining, whether it's like some, some guy wishes he did, and feel some kind of those calls. I don't know if it's like,
Yeah, you froze for about 10 seconds. So you were talking about
there we go. Okay, I think no one will bother me now. Sorry. It's like,
yes. Yeah, you were just starting to say that you are frozen, but yeah, there we go. Okay, cool. You were just starting to
okay,
talk
good.
about how like part of the toxicity is like needing to know everything, and you began to address that. Yeah, so mansplaining.
And
We're also aware of mansplaining. Let's go into that.
right, and one thing I've noticed is like around trans stuff, some people are just scared because they just don't know. They're like, trans, I don't know what that is, or to
Yeah,
them it has sex. I think that's like the biggest thing, is like somehow, people conflate gender with sexuality, and these are
right.
two very different, and I feel like there's kind of like, I was in a PhD program at the University of Pennsylvania, and just experienced enormous transphobia, and a lot of it was people who didn't know what trans is were freaked I have a life. I write, I read, I palsy. Like, I don't know. Literally, like, some of the fear I think has to do with their own insecurities about their own gender, about their own sexuality, and
Sydney, you're breaking up quite a bit. You're frozen and I can't hear you. So I don't know what's going on. Hello? Is is Sydney frozen on your end as well? Because I'm not able to hear him. There we go. Let's try this again. Move around, talk to me. Let me see if you're frozen. So you're moving, but I can't hear you. No, I can't hear you. I cannot hear you. Can you guys put in the question box if you can hear me? Yeah, do you want to like leave and come back? Okay, yeah, thanks. All right, so we're gonna have Sydney sign out and see if he can come back in. Like I said, like put into the question box if you all, first of all, you can put questions in there and I hopefully can sew them into the timeline. But let me know if you can hear him. Of course, we want you to hear this information. But yeah, just waiting for Sydney to sign back on. Here we go. Cool. Can you guys hear me okay? Um, I don't know how to stall. I'm trying to think of a way to stall. Mm, there we go. Let's try this.
are we back?
Yes. Yeah, it's still a little glitchy, but I can hear you. Oh man, you're frozen again. I don't know what's going
Okay,
on.
good.
Hmm. Don't think it's mine. Hmm.
Hmm.
Do you not have good Wi-Fi? Is it possible to maybe use your service? Would that help? Because you're totally frozen. I can't hear anything. So if you're watching right now, thank you for being patient. Don't dip out. Stay here. Put questions in the question mark box. This is like your opportunity. If you're just signing on, um, yeah, we're having difficult conversations and like the goal here today is to really normalize having difficult conversations, saying, I don't know, saying, I've been this way, saying, like, I am ignorant in this way, like, how do I do better? And so I think, like, definitely, I think as like a society, we're kind of afraid to acknowledge, like, where we have been problematic. I know, like, that's definitely something that I struggled with a lot. And, you know, of course, still I'm working through, you know, I'm still having moments of it, but I'm so much more comfortable with being called out now because I know that that's like that person's sign of love, that they feel like I can do better. And like, yeah, just demonstrating the power of being like, yes, I've been problematic. Like, we all have, and seeing it is the first step to reform. So, yeah, we're gonna bring back in Sydney. He just signed back in. There we go.
Hopefully we're back.
Yes, boom,
Okay,
we did it.
we did it. I
We've been
guess
tenacious and we won. We conquered. Fantastic.
I
Yes.
know.
All right, good. Yeah, wonderful. You're back to
Yeah.
normal. I can see you.
So
We can robot in real time. I'm just a
all the
dork. Yeah. Okay. All right. So
um
part of the
no,
toxicity is having to know everything, going into mansplaining. Take two.
right, but yeah, but so I mean, one of the things I think for people, one is they don't know what either being transgender or non-binary is, and then
Yeah.
that puts a panic.
Yeah.
I also think people think that it, you know, we're people who are hypersexualized.
Yeah.
And I generally, like as trans people, people are hypersexualizing us all the time because
Yeah.
you're reduced your gender, and our society does have this obsession with, like, you know, you know, one where it's like ridiculous questions you get about your body and, you know, your genitals or whatever it is.
What's the
And
dumbest question you got?
I mean, I get a ton of them.
Can you pick one that's just
My thing is like, don't, you know, don't be invasive. I mean, it's like, I don't know you. You don't need to know my business. And, you know, I think that's, there's just like so many things. But I mean, one of the other things I like to point out with transness is like, you know, in the same way that Black bodies are hypersexualized,
yeah.
right? Like we're thought to think about Black people in a certain way. That same stuff translates to how people are thinking about trans people and non-binary
Mm-hmm.
people. As you're seen as other, you're seen as different, and like this for some people that, you know, that gives them a free license, or thinks it gives them a free license to just be incredibly disrespectful and so on. And so,
Mm.
and I would say the other thing that I found, because like I found just so many different things, like one, there's people who think they need to know everything, and then when they realize, oh, I know nothing about being trans, it's like, then they start acting up.
Mm.
I think also people, you know, part of the transphobia is when you have trans people who are accomplished and super successful and brilliant people, and there are so many of us, and when we show up and show out, we get a specific type of misogyny back. I think especially for me as a trans masculine person, as somebody who was assigned female at birth,
Mm-hmm.
we get a specific kind of misogyny, which is all about erasure, because it's like, one, you know, either I don't want to see you, or, you know, you are visible, and you're, you know, I think one of the points I was trying to make is that I think when you make the decision to live authentically in your truth, for people who are not doing that, will be bothered. Okay. And this goes across,
Mm.
regardless of whether you're trans or
Yeah.
not, is there kind of way, because they don't know who they are. Maybe they've never asked these questions
Yeah.
about their gender or their sexuality, etc. And so a lot of the phobia is either A, I see myself and I wish I was there, but I'm not. So I'm going to be shady or awful towards somebody who is. Or these things make me feel uncomfortable because they bring up questions,
Mm-hmm.
right? Some of, I think also, especially for trans women, trans people, one of these they get like their own kind of trans misogyny that happens towards them, where you have, I mean, the violence I think that we often see towards trans women of color is rooted in don't even validate your
Mm-hmm.
existence, your identity, if you're identifying as a woman. And, you know, basically you have men who may be like cisgendered men who may be attracted to trans women, and in their own self-hate decide to destroy, again, this person who's living authentically in their truth and being themselves and just daring to live in the world. So, you know, with us, it's like I found of identities, of perspectives, etc. It's just you're constantly dealing with, you know, it's almost like a little bingo board of like, okay, what is it going to be today? And I will say for me, especially, you know, it's not only that people are reading me as trans and I might get some hate. Again, it's like as a Black person, I'm perceived as a Black man, or as a young Black man.
Yeah.
And so that also comes with its own thing. I also get homophobic stuff. People call me the F word. You know, there's just like, you don't know what it's going to be. And I have to say, like, for me, I obviously don't hold space for folks who, you know, clearly are not, you know, trying to hold space for me. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I guess, you know, one of your questions that you had posed was kind of like, what can folks do? I
Yeah.
think with, and the way that I see it is there's sort of like three words that always come to mind, and that's the idea of being an advocate, an ally, and an accomplice. And when you're an advocate, that means that you are speaking up for folks sometimes when we're in the room, sometimes when we're not,
Yeah.
right? It means correcting people if they screw up a trans or non-binary person's pronouns. I mean, you don't know how much it seriously saves people as far as emotional labor to not actually, those aren't my pronouns. um, Being a good ally, um, that's also something where it's not speaking over us, because I also think sometimes you get the zealous ally
Yeah.
thing is like
Right.
speaking over us, and you're like, I'm right here. You could have just passed the mic.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that
yeah. Yeah, that's
is
inside of white savior complex for sure. Yeah.
white savior, but you know, hey, it exists for everybody. Because I've also gotten people who think somehow transness is related to RuPaul's Drag Race, and then like again, when you asked about ridiculous questions, you know, again, making assumptions about you, I do not, and it's no shade to Ru, you know, whatever, but it's just like listening is so crucial, and just being open to listening and
Yeah.
receiving it. And that's what I was saying about this idea of toxic masculinity, of thinking you need to know everything, you need to do everything. I think
Yeah.
sometimes being present with people and allowing space for people to speak and speak their own truth, and for you to listen and actively
Yeah.
listen, I think especially difficult in our culture. This is so like phone, phone, phone. Um, and then I was going to say the last thing for being an accomplice, that means like for you as a cisgendered person or a straight person, etc., for you to, when we're not in the room, again, advocate for this, and that means changing these systems of oppression. If you have the
Yeah.
capacity to do that, if you know there's a messed up policy in your workplace or whatever, that means, you know, you that labor of changing that to make better for other people. So yeah, I mean, those are some ways that I see it. And then of course, also, I think there's ways of directly supporting us, of like, you're in the streets, which was a very big thing here in New York over the summer. There was like the largest protest for Black trans lives in history, of, I believe it was like over 13,000 people who congregated in Brooklyn in front of the Brooklyn Museum. And it was just amazing because I was there, and just to see like tons and tons of people who were not Black or trans just
Yeah.
be there.
Right.
Words.
Right.
And that
Yeah.
also means us in the work as artists, as dancers, you know, whether it's highlighting our work or doing what you're doing, Jojo, of like having us speak our truths, and opening up the dialogue and conversation. So
Mm.
there's a lot that people have some choices. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I got a question in the question box from Rockefeller, and she let me not paraphrase because I'll mess it up. She said, "Are there conflicts between gay men and trans women or lesbian in the ballroom scene?"
Oh, I think it's like, okay, ballroom is such a diverse and heterogeneous space. So the
Okay.
answer is both and no. Like,
Okay. All
because,
right.
yeah, because the yes and no is like, you know, it obviously depends on, I think, case by case. Definitely, of like, there's, you know, I think that there are some issues. I think generally, um, like trans women and gay men, there's definitely sometimes issues of misogyny for sure. Um,
Mm,
some of the
right.
shade, like that we were talking about, where you have people who are bravely living their truth, especially
Yeah.
as a trans woman of color, which is like the overwhelming number of trans women in ballroom. And yeah, there are some gay cis men who have a problem with that, you know, and that applies, I think, more broadly to the LGBTQ. That also exists in ballroom. Now,
Yeah.
at the same time, I do think, like, you know, ballroom was created by trans women of color. Avis Pendarvis, Dorian Corey, Pepper LaBeija, all. So it's one of those things where it's like we can't forget the history. You know, we know that
Right.
these were the people who created the space for us that we all so deeply, deeply love. And I think what's been interesting for me is when I do my oral histories and I'm talking to older people, many of whom may be gay or bisexual, cisgendered men, that were mentored by all of these women who were truly mothers to so many of the kids in the scene. And so I think, you know, yes and no, there are aspects of that, but I also at the same time, ballroom is unique, of like, it has been a space where we celebrate trans folks. Now, I
Yeah,
think
right.
now, to me, some of the issues come down to the way that history is shared, because
Mm,
lesbians, cisgendered women, and people who identify today as trans men have always been a part of ballroom, have always contributed as well, and walked categories. And this is the part of, like, for me, the archive that I'm very deeply interested in bringing to light, because a lot of those stories don't get told,
yeah,
and
those
it's
erasure,
interesting
yeah.
because some of that is like the legacy of Paris is Burning,
Right.
like extras. There is a whole, there was a, like, they did film what's called Butches, which is the category for lesbian women.
Yeah.
Um, and if you watch even older films, for example, there's a documentary that's called TV Transvestite. It's like Harlem Fantasy, came out in 1983, before Paris is Burning.
Mm,
And then you see butch lesbians who are walking categories, who are part of the community and part of the scene. And I do
I love that.
think some of that, yeah, and some of that honestly does come down to who's telling the story, right? Who's telling the narrative, who gets to curate that narrative, and uh, for me, one of the things that I've seen, the deeper I've gone into ballroom, of just being in the house, being in the community, also work, is how amazingly ballroom is, because it's, it is really its
Yeah.
own, in the sense, like,
Interesting.
even, questions around race,
Hmm.
there's certain things that apply and certain things that don't. There have
Yeah.
sometimes been white folks who walked categories and turned it, and are part of houses, and it's like, like the idea that it's this very cut and dry thing that looks a certain way and has looked that way. Again, it depends on who you, literally all of the things, which is why I think it's
Yeah. Yeah.
so.
Yeah. 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 And yeah, I think, I mean, something that's like really coming across for me in this conversation, and probably is like building from the other ones too, is just like there's just so many small pockets of different paths and things. Like I think even in like the journey of desocializing, first, things get kind of clumped together and it becomes kind of like monolithic, right? Like, oh, what do trans people feel about this? Right. But there's like all these very, very different experiences and dynamics to it. So that's something that I'm really, it's like so coming to the present focus. So thank you for that. And like inside of that, I'd love for you to address, I mean, you've definitely spoken to it a couple of times, but like just talking a little bit in more detail around how like Black and brown trans women are disproportionately attacked, abused, sexualized, hypersexualized. Not to say that like, a white trans or a white queer doesn't deal with oppression, but how do those show up differently? And yeah, I guess just speak to those dynamics.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think it's hard because it's like, that's definitely not my lived experience, and all of that is also very secondhand to me. Just being a member in this unity and listening, and I know that you just see that on all fronts, that it's again, it's about people obsessing over what they believe is different about us, instead of looking at
Yeah.
our humanity and realizing actually what makes us the same, that we all, like, live and breathe in this world and deal with stuff like everybody else.
Mm.
It's hard because I do think that on, we should be able
You
to
froze
recognize and cherish
again.
and celebrate.
It's just kind of glitchy, but yeah, yeah, you're back.
Okay. Yeah, well, I was gonna say, I just think that, I believe that there should be a space for celebrating our differences. And
Yeah.
I would say, one of the things that I love with ballroom is literally, it's like one of the things that's great about it is there can literally be like an infinite number of categories because it's all about celebrating what is different about us. It's like,
Yes, I've noticed that. It's crazy. Yeah.
yeah, and it's like, you could have a category that's like just, trans men performance or femme queen realness. And it's like, here are these sort of pockets of, you know, different identities or experiences or performances or whatever. And just like have a space to always been one of the things that really stands out about
Mm,
why it's really welcome and inviting space in many ways. I'm not going to say
yeah.
that a safe space because it's a competitive space. And I do feel like, at the end of the day, it is about a competition. There are politics within ballroom as there are any other communities, etc.
Yeah.
Um, but one of the things that I think I've been really impressed by, especially the ballroom scene in New York, is how malleable things can be sometimes,
Mm,
or
yeah.
all really dependent on and ballroom, even the ballroom scene that we know today in 2020 is radically different from what it was in, like, 1975 or in 87. These things always evolved and shifted and changed, and it's, I don't know, it's interesting. Promoter want a specific category that changes the game, you can do that, and that's kind of what's cool about it, is it's all, more fluid than is, certain bureaucracy that says, no, we don't want, XYZ things, whereas ballroom says yes, and, it's like,
Yeah, yes,
yes, let's
and
do.
yeah.
It's a very, I don't know, it's to me almost like an ethos in a way of a way of just
Mm.
sort of world and being in the world and being open to new things.
Yeah, yeah, I think like the yes and dynamic is amazing. And yeah, I'm gonna put that one in my pocket and like just continue to use that. And yeah, so that brings me to kind of just talking about thinking about presencing mainstream identities, and then how like how I mean, this word marginalized, like it's so charged with othering, but like how are like the concept and the prioritization of mainstream identities causing so much harm to like marginalized identities, and just like how do we open up that frame, and kind of live inside of yes and a little more, as as an individual navigating the dance community. Oh, there we go. Are you back?
Yes, yes.
Hmm.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, did
Good,
you
good,
get my
good.
question?
Yeah, so I think the question was about how, wait, sorry, could you run it by one more time?
Sure, absolutely. So you talked about yes, and like that brings me to the idea, just like thinking about a little bit more consciously showing up, like how is white supremacy showing up here? How are mainstream identities showing up here? And so how for each of us as individuals to be more considerate of marginalized identities. And I use quotations because I think it's like very othering, like I think it kind of continues the ideology of it. But like how do we open up our scope to more yes and like living into yes and just like kind of just speaking to how each individual can create space, safe space emotionally, physically for everyone in the community.
Yeah, I think, there's so many things that folks, right? And that means like paying us. It's also honoring our work, labeling it as our work. I think that's, and give, I know that the incorporating voguing or like, again, or, it's like, I think especially when it comes to the dance community, one of my really good friends once told me, like, you can tell if a dance teacher actually knows their stuff if they will tell you the history of that movement.
Sure.
And that to me is very important because, again, like I said, ballroom was created by LGBTQ people of color, Black folks, and it's important to honor those names, especially as many of our elders have passed away from, whether it's like AIDS related causes or, just the intersecting oppressions that oppress Black and brown LGBTQ people in America.
Yeah.
So honoring those histories, honoring those people who are living, who are actually teaching, because
Hmm.
sometimes it is like, okay, if they're looking for dancers who could do XYZ. Are you truly the best person for the gig? Maybe you should actually say, hey, you should, there are people in the ballroom scene who are in your city. They should be sitting on the panel and talking about these things. They should be, booked for XYZ gig because actually they have, they're part of the community and have actually put forth the work, the effort, not only in their practice, but also in, understanding the culture and knowing it. So I think it comes down to things like that. And that also means for, folks who have a certain level of privilege of being able to, again, act as advocates, act as accomplices, open those doors, and support the folks who do the heavy work and the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's like a lot of indirect erasure. And just like honoring, like knowing that you have a lane and like that lane is okay. And then also like as white people, we need to like constantly keep at the forefront that we're guests here. And just allowing people who are really in those like understandings, like that is their life and those are their niches, like really honoring that and creating more space for equity. So I absolutely, like I hear you, I co-sign. I wish everybody could operate a little bit more inside of this. Um, yeah, so how do hetero and cisgender show up for the LGBTQ plus community, like in life, like walking down the street and also in our dance community? How do we do better?
Yeah, well, I mean, as we discussed before, I think it's about standing up for folks when we're in the
Hmm.
room.
Yeah.
We're being, if our gender pronouns are being, not honored. I think it's also about showing up, like donating to trans organizations, donating to trans folks, for their gender affirming surgeries. There are like so many of them. I think it also means like listening to us. There are so many people who are journalists who
Mm.
work in media who are speaking up and speaking out about these issues. And and to me, it's not like, I think sometimes people think about social justice. It's like either A, in a very romanticized way, in a very like large, overpowering, and they're not really thinking about the micro ways that you can actually affect and create change. And by that, I
Mm.
mean like our interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
Sometimes as easy as, opening up, like if you are, let's say, a dance instructor, of like, if you're going around the room, yes, say people's pronouns along with their names. That is
Mm.
such a small thing
Yeah.
that signals like,
Really
I
makes a difference.
you, I validate you, and I honor you. I also think that, again, on this question of like not needing to know everything. I think sometimes if you don't know, or if you think something is beyond, like ballroom, go to the people who do know. We are out here, and we're very easy to find with social media. Like, like there's stuff. No, really though, and I mean, obviously there's a
Yeah.
certain limit to that because you don't want to be taxing people with free labor that you can easily just Google yourself. Um,
Right.
but I'm a big fan of like, okay, like again, do I need to be booked for this thing? Could somebody else be better for it who I think is actually more qualified? Is there
Yeah.
information that I know exists somewhere else? Maybe I should Google first. When I hit a wall, maybe I should ask somebody. And I think that
Mm.
kinds of things, I feel like the words that we don't hear enough today are humility,
Mm.
deference, and also just a willingness to be open, and
Yeah.
that means open to information, open to learning,
Yeah.
open to, I don't know everything about the world, and maybe there is somebody who know a little more about something else, and maybe I should be open to that. Like,
Yeah.
honest to, like, so many, like, learning that, oh, actually, like, humility means, Sid, you are learning, you don't know everything, and that's okay. Honestly,
Yeah.
it's just
Your
like
way is
such a,
not the right way. Yeah.
yes, and it's not the only way. There are
Yeah.
many methods getting to, you know, the same, you know, a similar end. So yeah, I think it comes down to that, with like how folks can support, how they can stand up, how they can speak out, and the thing is, like, our communities need your help, because we can't do this by ourselves. That's not how change works. We didn't make these messed up systems we live in, you know, and like, it literally makes the work go so much faster and so much easier when you have the help of again, allies, accomplices, advocates, folks who not only like repost things but actually like do things, you know.
Yeah.
And one thing I do want to say, of like, you know, on this micro level, I also see it of like, you know, I was telling a friend, you start from where you're at, you know. If you're a barber, then if you are like a trans friendly barber where I can get my hair cut and I don't have to worry about homophobia or transphobia in your place, that literally opens the door to so many things in my life, you know. There's
Yeah. Right.
literally small things like this. If you're an,
Hmm.
what are ways
Yeah.
that you're LGBTQ plus history in your curriculum? How
Yeah.
are you about Black and Brown, you know, LGBTQ people who have created change in the world? Like, this is what I'm saying. It's not like, oh, there's all of these issues on Twitter and I have to tune in. It's a lot. We are dealing with so much.
Yeah.
But you can scale it down of like, well, this is my life and how I interact with it daily. What are ways that I can like think about creating change in that way? It goes a very, very long way.
Yeah. I really think that this is so important. And I want to share just a little bit like a personal story, because I think it maybe can help someone to identify the distinction between like giving versus like dismantling inwardly. So like I've been saying Black Lives Matter for a while, right? 4 years, something like when it came out, I was like, okay, Black Lives Matter. And then like someone like a year ago was like, hey, that doesn't mean that you're not racist. Like that does not mean that you have dismantled all your inherent biases. That doesn't mean that you've desocialized your brain. And they're like, I know that that might sound shocking, but there's still inner work for you to do. And then, that was like so shocking to me to think that like if I have been contributing, that I would still have these issues inside of me. And so I say that in like humility, not to gold star, but more to like, even if you're giving to culture, it does not mean that you have done the inner work to dismantle things that are very much hidden from the view. Because I would have been like, no, I don't have any biases, but like I had so many that I just didn't even know were there. And so I really do say that in encouragement, that there is such a distinct difference between contributing and looking within, looking at the micro things that we've been colonized to think about. And then as soon as I started working on my inherent racism, all the other stuff started popping up, my internalized misogyny, my transphobia, like it's all part of this patriarchy. So I just think it's so important what you're saying. And I want this to like really be left with people, that like social justice, like it's not out there. It's not just in the government. Like it is with these interactions, holding space. Um, and so I don't want to center my voice right now, but I just really want to encourage everyone to like really notice these differences and do this inner work. And like, if you're a barber, be an all Black Lives Matter, all like true equality barber. Like I think that what you said was so amazing. And there's all this work for us to continue to do. And I still have so much to learn. I have so much to learn. But I just really want to leave people with that, because it's so important to just help people feel human and heard and acknowledged. So yeah, thanks for letting me share that experience. I try to like say that in like, again, like humility. I don't want to center, but yeah, man, I wish everyone could like really know that and understand it, as the basis for their work. So yeah, just closing up here, who do we follow? Where do we get educated? What action steps can we take? And like, where do we go from here?
You said being informed, right? Informing yourself, informing your community. I think it's also about listening, you know, like
Yeah,
we said, like listen to where the conversation conversation in that. There's so many people who you can follow who do amazing work on LGBTQ, so on and so forth. And I think, like, you know, it's about tuning into those conversations. I think, um, yeah, and also ending up. It's like for trans non-binary folks, like we just have to do so much. And like, again, it means, you know, whether it's like one aspect, but also standing up for the people who are in your network, or even making space for those people so they feel welcome. And really just starting from that. And I think on this question of humility, you know, like, I think this is another, because again, I think our minds always go to the extreme of, like, you know, the extreme transphobics, you know, people with their signs and, you know, whatever. But I think it is important for even folks who are like, oh, you know, whether or not you have friends, or you know, believe you do XYZ, and some your how you're impervious to your own internalized biases. Yes, do the deeper work. That's the thing. Not everyone is, sadly, not everyone is doing the work. And I think some of the biggest culprits can be the people who, especially when it comes to Black and brown culture, who are working in those spaces, especially around dance. You know, if you're doing any form of, you know, whatever's considered street dance or ballroom, etc., it means, yes, not just like loving voguing and like not supporting Black trans folks, like that to me doesn't really make sense. Or even like, you know, again, because like people love Black culture, but sadly do not love Black people as much as they love Black culture, which is very, very real. And the same goes for voguing. It was created by Black trans people. If only people loved voguing as much as they love Black trans people, it would be a very different story. So I think it's about creating spaces, about speaking up, about knowing when to fall back, knowing when to pass the mic. Also, you know, being graceful, giving yourself grace, giving others grace. That's my other big thing. Like, knowing that, okay, not everyone's going to get it right. And I know you were talking about calling people out, but my big thing is calling people in. You know, I feel like call out culture is so exhausting. This whole like dragging people on the internet. It's literally sometimes just DMing somebody like, hey, do you have a moment to chat? Can we talk about this? And like allowing people to have that, because again, I think when it comes to not pretending to know everything, because I also do feel like allies sometimes do this, where they're like, I learned the thing, and now I have the hammer, and I will just nail every.
I'm sure I've done it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot do, but I think, you know, and to be honest, I think this is what a lot of white allies are like afraid of doing, is like literally the big emotional work of pulling aside your racist uncle, grandpa, whoever, grandma, and just being like, let's talk about this, you know, because it is emotional labor, it is exhausting, but at the same time, you have the capacity to do that, whereas a lot of Black trans folks, were just trying to live our lives, you know. And like, I think that's the thing, is again making that space, making that time, and doing that accomplice work that those of us, you know, who are not in that position just are not do. So yes, that I think that is where I will leave you. Be kind and be graceful, and have a little humility with it as well.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. You know, it's challenging and confronting. And I think like that's when you know you're like, it's in the work. Like I think Rachel Cargle said, like if the work feels good, it's performative, or something like that, something along those lines. So yeah, thank you for your time, your energy, your wisdom. Thank you for just having this conversation with me. Um, yeah, I'm grateful. I'm grateful to be able to, and you know, just have this conversation. And thank you to Ryan for introducing us. So yeah, good luck to you. I'll make sure to drop your handle below. And if there's anyone that you think of that we should be following, please feel free to message me, and then I'll add that to the handle when we post this video. One more time, thank you so much to Stance for having us here. Any final words that you want to say before we drop off?
Thank you so much, JoJo. Thank you so much to Stance. And thank you for doing this work. This is so phenomenal. Everyone who's like tuned in and is out here, like, let's just keep moving. Keep moving. And remember to vote. Jesus, I hate that I have to say that, but
No,
please,
it's important. Yeah, remember to vote.
do that as well. Remember, it's
Yeah.
not the only way political, but it's one part of the pie. So
Hmm.
make sure you do that. You're on the streets and you're also, yeah, getting those ballots in. So
Yeah, dope. Okay, amazing. Thank you. Have a blessed day. I appreciate you, and I'm sure I'll talk to you soon.
yeah, thank
Okay,
you. Bye.
bye. All right, so we're finishing up. I just wanted to say, thank you all for being here. If you're watching this, after the live, thank you for listening. Um, let's continue to normalize having these conversations. My goal today was to, really make these conversations about them and yeah, just make sure that the conversation and the person that I'm interviewing is uplifted. So, yeah, I'm gonna post resources when I post this because some of the comments, people entered in. I know you guys didn't necessarily, maybe even some of you didn't know to answer those questions, or we can't like tag certain people. But yeah, I'll make sure to post those things. And yeah, if you're here, I know it's because you're wanting to learn and dismantle socialization. Don't forget to vote. Like, there's a lot of instructions on like what can disqualify your mail-in ballots. So make sure you research that. Make sure you're totally ready to vote. Let's create safe spaces. I just had a question pop up. Let me see. Yes, thank you, Rockefeller. It was really heartwarming. And just once again, thank you so much to Daniel for allowing us to use, um, you know, this platform to be able to lift up voices that really need centering. So, yes, much love. Peace to everybody. Bye.